And we are recording. So, to all who shall see these presents, greetings. On behalf of Marine Corps University, the Marine Corps University Foundation, and the Brute Krulak Center for Innovation and Future Warfare, welcome back to the Brutecast, our series designed to connect the worlds of the warfighter and PME with the best in innovative and creative thought. I'm your host, Major Nate Janikin, Operations Officer at the Krulak Center. Before we begin, please remember that all opinions expressed here are those of the individual and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Krulak Center, Marine Corps University, United States Marine Corps, or any other agency of the United States government. We will also be recording this webcast for the benefit of those in our community of interest who could not join us today, so we ask that you keep your own webcams off to help us stream smoothly. At the conclusion of our discussion, we will have a question and answer session, so if you have a question, just type it into the group chat, and I'll go through them in the order received. So when we last recorded last Thursday, what was then day 19 of the conflict, I think the big thing is we had mentioned that Prime Minister Netanyahu's comments on the coming ground invasion of Gaza. And while it didn't appear that that ground invasion started that evening, they definitely started shaping fires and conducted some additional raids. And then it looked like the ground invasion actually started the day after. So that's kind of where we're at. We've had a lot happen, though, in those last 5 days. So I don't want to really delay in having the conversation about what's been going on, but I do want to put it over to you, Dr. Tarzi, and see if you have some opening comments for us as well.
Yes, greetings to you and to our listeners and viewers. As you said, yes, the ground offensive has begun, and as we mentioned, I believe it was going to be beginning and continuing at a very determined and very methodical pace, not a all-out assault. As you said, raids were a very good word for that. Where we are right now, and what we hear from the open media from Israel is that city of Gaza, so when I say Gaza City, this is the northern part, which is the most populous part of Gaza. There are three major centers of population. This is the largest, and this is where Hamas's stronghold is. So for Gaza, this will be in the northern area. That has been encircled, meaning the Israelis have now cut south of Gaza City a line all the way to the coast of the Mediterranean. Which, what is the meaning of that in a tactical sense is that when the ground invasion takes shape in a much more robust way, Hamas would not have a way to come south. Of course, the east is Israel, north is Israel, and west is the Mediterranean. So those are all blocked. The only way out would be south. If Israel cuts off Gaza City, that allows them to operate without allowing Hamas to go south. So that's what's happening. And from what we hear from Israeli reports, open media again, is that the major assault that was expected to go into Gaza City, so far Israel has been operating on the peripheries of the peninsula, of the Gaza area, more closer to a border, and some raids into on they got one of the hostages that was rescued, a soldier actually. But the main assault, which will be basically a urban fighting, going through, trying to dismantle the headquarters as much as they can, the ability for Hamas to shoot rockets to Israel, and also, of course, apprehending or eliminating the leadership of Hamas. That should start in the next 2 days. That's what we hear from open sources in Israel. So between and tomorrow is exactly 1 month from this horrible attacks on Israel. So we expect something. Again, these could change, of course, depending on what the ground operations look like. But right now, what we hear, and they are talking about it openly, at least in the Israeli press, is that it's between the next 2 days. So that's where we stand on the offensive, on the military side of it. Aerial bombardment last night was one of the hardest since this operation began. This again, those who are in the military, they know, because before any assault with infantry on the ground, you have to soften and make sure that the enemy doesn't have ability to harm them. Rockets to Israel from Gaza have subsided much because a lot of those positions have been bombed. And here's where the controversy comes in, because some of those positions have been placed, some of those batteries or single rockets have been placed either on hospitals, in front of schools. And this controversy goes back to what we discussed in our third episode about the information warfare, where each side says, look, one says that Israel is hitting schools, and Israel says we're not hitting schools. You are using schools as a battlefield. So this goes back and forth, and of course, this is going to keep on going as this war intensifies, even more than that, on the ground offensive. Numbers on the Hamas side, the numbers unfortunately are coming all from their side. So we see 8,000, but we don't know what it is. Israel has lost 31 IDF soldiers, KIA, kills in action so far. So that's the military side. On the humanitarian pause, our United States Secretary of State, Mr. Blinken, has been shuttling all over the Middle East. He was actually in Ramallah, the Palestinian Authority headquarters, met with their leader, Mr. Mahmoud Abbas. He was actually in Baghdad. He met all the GCC except one, that's the Gulf Cooperation Council, the Arab countries on the Arabian Gulf. He met 5 of 6, trying to find a way to make sure there are more humanitarian efforts. The result of that is there has been shipping. Actually, the first drop of humanitarian aid came in by a plane from the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan with coordination of Israel, and it was dropped in. However, Israel has refused to allow any pauses. Their condition right now for any pause is that the hostages, which are 244 or 240 plus hostages still in the hands of Hamas, they must be released before even there's a discussion of a potential pause. And those who want to mediate, Qatar specifically is stating that they need a pause before they can negotiate. So we are in that negotiation with that aspect. And I don't want to talk much about Hassan Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah, but he made a rambling speech. Most of it was not that important. The most important aspect was that while they're harassing Israel in the north, and he believes that's very important, they are not. They first of all say they had no idea, nor Israel and on Iran. It was interesting that he actually spoke as a spokesman of Iran. He kept on saying not more than one time that the Islamic Republic of Iran had no knowledge of the attacks of 7 October and that they were not involved, and they are not involved right now. This is a local thing to kind of exonerate Iran, but the message you get is, at this point at least, Hezbollah and Iran do not want to make this a much wider war, yet Iranian proxies, this is the Middle East for you, the Iranian proxies continue to hit. Hezbollah itself is hitting northern Israel. The Houthis from Yemen, another Iranian longhand, launched missiles on Israel that were intercepted. And American bases have been hit in Iraq. So there is a much lower intensity, but there is conflict. They just don't want to heighten it. That's my view. And let's not forget that there are communities, almost 200,000 Israelis are right now out of their homes. Communities both in the northern side of Israel and around Gaza have been actually evacuated. That's another thing in Israel that's disruptive to the life there. 200,000 people or more are taken out of their places. So I would stop at that point. That's kind of a both regional, humanitarian, and military synopsis for our viewers before we start in your Q&A and our audience. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I had looked at was, we sort of talked about it in our second episode when we talked about why Gaza is what it is and like where it is and why it is. And we had talked about how densely populated it is. When you look at Gaza City, and obviously I think you've said it a couple times where, we have numbers, but for population inside Gaza, but they're all just sort of educated guesses. We don't have exact numbers, but if we go with the numbers that we think, the population density in Gaza City is like 32,000 people per square mile, which puts it at one of the most densely populated, I think Macau is like the only place that's more densely populated.
It's Singapore, Macau, Hong Kong, and that level.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when you take all of Gaza, and the square mile, the population density still puts it on the same level as Hong Kong. So it's a very densely populated. So when we start thinking about urban warfare, like that's going to be a key consideration is how densely populated a place like Gaza City is. And then, you had brought up the rocket attacks, coming from some of these locations. I've seen, close proximity to schools, close proximity to hospitals. That was one of the big things that happened in between our last recording was the Al-Quds hospital, the second largest in Gaza, got struck more than once. And I think initially it was, not claimed by the IDF. And then the IDF said, okay, yeah, we did do that. And then the ambulances getting struck as well, because the IDF is claiming that Hamas is moving fighters with the ambulance. So you brought up.
They're showing, IDF is showing, again, the information warfare on this one.
Yeah.
If we go to the the minutiae, which may be important as human lives in it, but it's also part of this battle. We look at it, ambulances have been used before. There are footages. Again, the other side doesn't believe that, but and the hospital you mentioned, there has been reportings of saying that the whole hospital has been lit. It was actually used as a command center. So there was no fuel was available, electricity was available. What is stated, and this is going to be again they have asked, which is something that humanitarian side says it's impossible. Israel IDF has asked that hospital be evacuated, because the belief is that not only that one, but Al Shifa as well, they have either headquarters, entrances, or ammunition or fuel supplies of Hamas underneath these buildings, precisely because that would protect them from strikes by Israel and ongoing. This is not first. This is the most intense battle or war between Israel and Hamas, but there has been other attacks, and how to protect them is to basically shield them by schools, churches, but hospitals specifically. And ambulances are a very good way to maneuver their people. So this is going to be, again, in the court of opinion, if opinions are set, those would not change them. But in the court of, us looking at it from an educational perspective, from a more scientific perspective, it does matter whether this is, Israel denied from day one the hit that on the hospital that was now pretty much known that it was a failing missile from Gaza that fell on that hospital. But these ones they claiming, but they have this rationale that yes, the hospital is used or the ambulance is used as a medium of transportation of the enemy. Then therefore they lose the Geneva Convention guarantees or ideas that they are not non-combatant. The minute that is used as a combatant, that's why Red Cross, for example, in a war would never carry combatants. It's only wounded people. If they do, they become part of the combat. Therefore, they're legitimate targets. That's legal. I'm not a legal expert, but that's what that is. I think it's very important because that changes perceptions. You see the streets of Washington, Berlin, everywhere else. That changes perception. So we cannot underestimate it. We cannot, say it's not important. At the same time, if you're battling in a very dense population where your targets are hiding in hospitals, it creates a dilemma. And I use the Greek word here because dilemma, going back to the Greek tragedies, is two choices, none of which are good. So for IDF, there are two choices: you hit them or you don't hit them. If you don't hit them, they survive. So your mission is not accomplished. If you hit them, you risk killing civilians. So that's where they stand right now.
Yeah, and then going back to your comment about, the Israel has said, hey, we're not going to do any kind of temporary ceasefire until all the hostages have been released. And then going to foreign nationals departing Gaza via the Rafah Gate, I think it was Saturday that Hamas said, hey, we're not going to allow any foreign nationals to depart Gaza until we get, word from the Israelis that they aren't going to strike ambulances anymore, because there have been almost 400 foreign nationals and their families that have been able to depart Rafah. I think last count I saw was about 80 Americans and their families. But there's also been injured Palestinians that have been afforded the opportunity to go into Egypt for care.
Yeah, and you get numbers. I mean, again, this morning I heard on the French side, 40 French citizens have been killed. So when you see that, this is not yes, it is Israel and Hamas, but a lot of internationals have been butchered or now are dying in the ensuing conflict. So yeah.
Yeah, and then going back to your point about there's been a lot of pro-Palestinian rallies. I think I saw one in London where about 30 people got arrested. There was one in D.C. on the same day. That was on Saturday. And then there was the folks that boarded what was the name of that ship? The MV Cape Orlando, which is part of the U.S. Ready Reserve Fleet out in California. They tried to board it and actually delayed its departure by 9 hours.
Yeah, you see, I mean, there was also a demonstration near Incirlik in our U.S. It's not a U.S. base, but U.S. has forces in it. It's Turkish base. There's a lot of that, but in the capitals of the West as well, as you said. Unfortunately, the thing I would want to make a comment on that is many people don't even know what is going on. I mean, they hear something. This is the part that we discuss regional, we discuss humanitarian, we discuss the battlefield. What we didn't discuss, and I will put that before we move on to the Q&A, there's a more international, or what we were all concerned about, a major power aspect. Who is benefiting from this? Certainly not Israelis. Their whole deterrence was shattered. The country is right now at war. They lost 1,400 people in very horrific ways. Certainly not the Palestinians. That's not. And Hamas hopefully won't benefit from this, because most likely they will not, at least for now, would not have the power. I'm not saying they won't exist, but they will not have the power to strike Israel. Who is benefiting? Iran? Absolutely. Absolutely. Who else is benefiting? Russia. We know for without a question that Russia has given them, through Iran or indirectly or directly, if not direct weapons, but intelligence, information. But more importantly, this war is taking people's minds off of Ukraine. Even Mr. Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, said so. There's no question about it. For the United States, if it comes to, and I will say this on a personal basis, if it comes to the security of Israel or Ukraine, Israel is much more closer to home. It's almost a domestic issue for us. So this is taking a lot of, not just the U.S. Europeans keep on saying, if you hear the Europeans, oh, Ukraine is very important, we're standing by. But at the end of the day, it is exhausting our how much we can give collectively, the West. And now Israel is there, so it allows Russia to do more in there. It also helps China in a longer way. Already a Chinese vessel is in the Red Sea. We don't talk about that, but that is China is putting its head. It's coming into what used to be almost, China was only involved in the South China Sea, and we looked at that aspect of it. But now they're in the CENTCOM. If you look at the United States side, it's the Central Command area of responsibility. It's only one vessel, but they're there. And also, as it weakens in their view, the United States, as it breaks down our alliances, in the sense that some people say, okay, you have to have more humanitarian aid. U.S. says no. This helps China in the longer run. And also domestically, and I'm not going to discuss about U.S. domestic, when you hear what's going on within our own domestic discussions, this is a boon for China as well. China much longer term, Russia more immediate. Iran, I would say Iran is the main beneficiary for the short term, and right now Russia much more looking at Ukraine not being pressured, and then China for the more strategic time. So there's a lot going on in this. And I'm not saying that the demonstrations you see in Washington or London or Berlin are orchestrated by the Chinese or Russians, but they certainly are helping. They're certainly helping. The messaging, how this goes in, is incredible, because this shows that the West cannot handle it. And now you hear a lot of, some of the, Palestine is not even an issue anymore. A lot of what you hear in the streets of European capitals is basically this idea that these immigrants, I'm an immigrant myself, so I can say it, that they are here, we are not part of Europe, we are here to basically change Europe to something different. That creates a tension between the communities within Europe. And again, don't forget what China wants with Russia. They want to change the post-Second World War American-built order. And this helps them. So I don't want to get over, look at it from a, 30,000 feet perspective. But if you do look at it, the Chinese and the Russians are very, very content about that right now. So I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think there's also a big difference between being pro-Palestinian and pro-Hamas. I mean, maybe not a huge
Absolutely.
difference, but at least
somebody said that, how is it possible that you support, like a group that has clearly mass rapes, killing of children, burning of bodies, and you support humanitarian aspects or rights of the women, and you support this organization. It cannot be done both ways. And I don't make judgment calls, because some people say but there are a lot of contradictions, or people flying the Taliban flag in Washington, in London. Do they know what that stands for? And this is the idea. People are using symbolisms that don't make any sense, because once you have a crowd up, it just takes its own way, and it loses the objective where it started. This says humanitarian assistance for Palestine, and that they can find a lot of people around the table. But if they want, the slogan, some people say it's only a slogan, Palestine shall be free from the river to the sea. Well, that's not a slogan. That tells you Israel will not exist. So that's not, where are you going? If you give a slogan and you keep on saying it, even some politicians, that doesn't mean that it's just a slogan. You know what I'm saying? So this is a rift in our societies. It's a rift in our societies, and it's supposed, obviously, those who want these societies to fail, which is China and Russia and Iran, and so.
Yeah, and I think the U.S. has made a very specific stance of supporting Israel, but at the same time making sure that there are it's a measured campaign against Hamas, and not a campaign against every living soul within Gaza, which I think that misinformation piece, you can depending on where you're getting your information, it can look like one more than the other, and that's the difficult part. But I think it's super easy with I spoke a couple minutes ago about how densely populated Gaza is. I mean, we saw it in our campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan. Anytime we went into a city or a village, there was almost always some sort of collateral damage.
And I say, in case of Afghanistan, there's no place in the entire country that's as densely populated as Gaza, not even close to it. So you're talking about a much more, and also the main issue is right now, as I said, Gaza City is literally encircled on two sides by Israel, one side by the Mediterranean, with Israeli Navy controlling it, and the south is now controlled by the IDF. So you have an encirclement, which also creates a different psychological aspect of how you fight. Because, I mean, if you don't have a fallback position, that changes your whole calculation of how you engage in a battlefield. If you have no fallback, and it's either surrender or fight. So that's basically what we're coming down to here, because there's either surrender or fight, and the Israelis are aware of that. It's not that they're not. I mean, the fact that they announce it publicly that we have just encircled Gaza City, that means that this is a fight for Hamas. Is a fight for them to, if you're on their shoes, they right now have to basically fight as much as they can. Also, at the same time, this is again goes back to the humanitarian aspect. Make Israel look as bad as possible. It was interesting that a senior Palestinian official in the West Bank, Mr. George Habash, he's a advisor to Mahmoud Abbas. He was claiming, at least in the clip I saw, that he blamed Hamas for killing Palestinian children, and he said actually that gets them more traction, but this is not good. So there's a lot going on within the communities of the Palestinians as well, because yes, neither the United States nor Israel wants, they keep on saying we are not in fight with the Palestinian people because they need to live with them eventually. Right now, everybody's talking, which we didn't talk about. We didn't discuss that in the third one. And it's important to understand that this war will not end the day the bullets stop. There has to be, right now, as I mentioned in the third one or second one, I don't remember, there has to be a parallel. And I think our Secretary of State is going, if he had frequent flyer miles right now, he would have, a lot of them. There has to be a parallel that once Hamas is not there, let us assume Hamas is not there, what fills that gap? Because you can't have a hole. We see it in the Middle East or anywhere, but especially in the Middle East, that's my area. Wherever you have a gap in authority, as in case of Hamas, something fills it. And usually it's not a very good thing that fills it. If you fill it without people's involvement, without due process, without some sort, I say democracy with the quotation, but without a aspect of certain rules of human engagement with it. If that doesn't happen, you have seen it. And there was a gap. ISIS took it. In Afghanistan, who filled it? Somebody will fill it. So it has to be a parallel track right now to what does the day after look like, and who will do that? The Palestinians. So if you have to make sure that within the Palestinian people, there is enough trust. Yes, with Israel as well, to build a future. There's 2 million plus people. Hamas is not all of them. And that is the challenge. That's the challenge of the day after. Who's going to be there? For us in the United States, 40 years ago, we did the exact same thing. Palestinians were kicked out of Lebanon. We went there, and you saw what happened. I mean, we went there as peacemakers, right? Peacekeepers. And I'm not trying to say that the BLT bombings, the Beirut bombings will be, but all these things have to be discussed right now, in my view. Some people say, let the war end. We don't know. Because when the war ends, that gap, you don't have much time to fill it. Because somebody else will rise its head. It could be even worse than Hamas. Could be more vengeful. I don't know. It can be more than worse than Hamas. But in the Middle East, we have seen that these, you go through one and the other one comes out, and it's makes it like people look back and say, you know what, the previous bad guy wasn't as bad as we thought, comparing to the new one. So these are things that I think we need to discuss. And the people who are on the streets, these kind of discussions are not even there. It's a very maximalist, very one-sided, and sometimes they don't even think that they're supporting people who just went into houses of people and raped, killed children, destroyed, burned people. If you justify that, then there's a that itself needs a discussion, in my view. So I leave it at that.
Yeah, before we have some questions in the chat. Before we go to that, I do want to go kind of away from Gaza and go to northern Israel and talk about that border between Israel and Lebanon. You talked in the beginning about Nasrallah making the comments from Hezbollah, but there have been exchanges of rockets from Lebanon, and I think even in Nasrallah's statement, he did say like, "Hey, this was planned by Hamas, executed by Hamas. Hezbollah had nothing to do with it. But if you come north, like we will." Like it'll be a bad day for you if you come north.
Yes. Well, he also said this is a battle of perseverance. I'm looking at my notes, and yesterday there was a escalation, at least from Lebanese side. They said that they claimed that Israel had hit a car in which a grandmother and 3 children were hit, and that now Hezbollah will be much more aggressive. They were hitting. They lost a lot of people. I have the numbers. It's more than 20 Hezbollah fighters killed. Some tried to infiltrate, and thus far, it has been exchanges on military targets. And Nasrallah made a comment again that he said when he was claiming that what they're doing in the north, the harassment itself is a help. We're not getting in, but we are harassing them, and this keeps. He even gave numbers how many Israelis are in the north, trying to make sure that we don't create a second front, and therefore we are helping the Palestinians. He made us also a comment that was, to me, I know again this requires its own long discussion. He claimed that Israelis were the ones who killed their own people. I don't know if you noticed that. And to me, that was quite interesting. He said that all these rapes and murders and killing of Israeli civilians were, according to Nasrallah, was done by Israel to give Hamas a bad name. Right after that, he said, we are hitting military targets in Israel only. How I see that, and he was contrasting himself and his party to the Palestinians. I actually see that as almost as a admonishment of the Palestinians without saying it. Because the way he put it was, nobody in their right mind would accept the part that he said that Israelis did it themselves. And the way he said, well, you did this, we don't do that. We are fighting them more like a normal state. He actually put Hezbollah in a higher, we are doing mill to mill. They hit our targets, we hit their targets. And he said, he mentioned we are attacking their military targets in the north. Right before that, he said Israelis kill their own people. So it's interesting that there's still, yes, they're together, but it's not, I don't think that there's too much of a love loss between the Shia, Nasrallah, and the Sunni Hamas. Right now, they're together. But at the end, I don't think he wants to equate himself with what happened. This is what I'm trying to say. And again, that's a discussion by itself.
Yeah, sort of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, almost.
Exactly.
Kind of feeling.
But you guys are too much. We don't do that. We are like a state, because Hezbollah tries to portray that, when the ceasefire happened in 2006, it was they stopped the day they said they would stop. So they want to conduct themselves more as a state, as a responsible state, rather than, because they're losing ground in Lebanon. Let's not forget that. Because of the downturn in Lebanese economy, which is just totally bad. The blast that happened, which was Hezbollah caused because of keeping the nitrate in the port. And Hezbollah had at one point a lot more support throughout Lebanon. Now they are losing that. As a political organization, they're losing that. So he cannot risk that. So he's trying to put himself, in my view, if he's pushed either by the Iranians, I don't think the Iranians have that much say on Hezbollah specifically, but he could open a second front, but he was very careful to say, we're not. This we do, we hit their military targets, they hit ours, but it could get out of hand. Like today, they say that because the people were hit, so our response, being Hezbollah's response, will be much more severe. Let's see what happens. The north is not all quiet. Israelis have evacuated the entire communities along the border.
Yeah, I saw 2 kilometers. Yeah. All communities within 2 kilometers of the border have been evacuated, which creates its own strain as well. So not only do you have combat operations, but now you have displaced. Yeah.
Yeah. So no, the north is by no means secure. Yes, there's no open battle going on, but it's not secure. And Israel has now called up all the reserves. So we are talking IDF right now is upwards of 600,000 people, because they have 200,000, active duty and 400,000 reserves. If we assume that all the reserves are activated, you're talking about 600,000 or at least 500,000 people in armed feeding all of them is a lot of, I mean, for Israel, the strain is a lot because a lot of people are not working. Schools in most communities are not functioning. They're doing it online. And you have a 500,000 army that has to be maneuvered, fed, maintained. So
yeah, and as a size comparison, I think 600,000, like if you added the Army and the Marine Corps together, you would have just shy of, or you would have the 600,000 would be just shy of the combination
that's
of those two
maximum.
services
I
together.
don't know if every single reservist has been activated, but if they activate everybody, we're talking 600,000. But right now, even if you say, look, it's I would say it's upwards of half of 500,000 right now under arms. I mean, an active. One way, active could be even, doing work in the cities of Israel, protection, all, but they're activated.
So we'll go to the first question that is here in the chat from Albert. And Albert asks, has the experience of the 2005 disengagement and end of this Israeli boots on the ground military occupation of Gaza, is it likely to affect the conduct of the coming campaign or the end state of the campaign?
That goes back to what I said. This is a good question because somebody, Mr. Lee is looking forward. And of course, lessons learned are very important. That's what I do. I'm a teacher. I look at the PME, the professional military education. We look at backgrounds. The 2005, I say the latter part of his question is more important. How it works on the future. It was a decision by Israel, but it wasn't a decision. I mean, everybody says, Ariel Sharon, then the prime minister, decided unilaterally to leave Gaza. Yes, but at the same time, let's not forget there was an intifada going on. This is an outburst of that. And in a way, they were saying, okay, we'll leave Gaza and see what happens. They did not expect, nobody, Israelis did. We, the collective we of the outside, did not expect Hamas takeover so quickly and so brutally. And this goes back to the question of when 2005, Israel leaves, the Palestinian Authority is in charge. They leave them in charge. And they can't keep Gaza running. And then there's an election. And whether the election was open totally or not, but there was an election, and the Hamas actually wins seats. But even whether they won or not, they take over ostensibly through elections. Let's just give them that. And they start killing or dismantling everything that the Palestinian Authority had done. And it's very infamous sites that they actually threw some of the Palestinian Authority members from the roofs of their work buildings. And that changed the whole situation. 2007 is when Hamas actually takes over. So to that question, yes. And this is exactly what I made the point. The day after this battle, whether it's in a week, whether it's in a month, in my perspective, this battle will end in one way or the other with Hamas defeated, or at least to Israel's satisfaction, Hamas defanged enough. What's going to happen? This is where the 2005, and I will extend the 2005 to 7, because Hamas does not show up as a power controlling until 2007. And then even beyond 2007, how this works out and how Hamas was actually, in a way, became more powerful. Partially, it became more powerful because the Palestinian Authority became less powerful, both internally, because of one leader eliminating all other potential leaders. Secondly, later on, within the Israeli politics, there was, we just had a publication, and if Mr. Lee wants it, we'll send it to him, within the Krulak Center's Middle East Studies, by a retired Israeli general officer, Brigadier General Brom, who claims, and it is correct, but he claims that one reason was that the current administration or current government in Israel, which has been in power for a long time now, longest serving, they actually because they wanted to make sure that there is no partner for a two-state solution, they weakened the Palestinian Authority, which in a way elevated Hamas's power. So all of these things has to be, and it has to be a honest assessment, painful, honest assessment, because I don't think that there's a lot of victims, Palestinian people, the Israelis were killed, but when you look at the political side of it, then everybody made mistakes. The Israelis made mistakes. We, the United States, I say this in a personal, we made mistakes. Europeans, we kind of, at one point, we all decided that the Palestinian situation is best left alone and managed. That was the whole thing, conflict management. That was the buzzword we all had. Well, from 2007 until now, we tried to manage it. There were terms Israelis used like mowing the grass. Every other few years you go, and when they hit you, you mow the grass, it becomes manageable, and then it comes out. Well, that's over. So going back to 2005, number one, when you leave a place empty, we want to know what goes on. In 2005, Israel did not look at that. They were pressurized because of the Intifada, but they wanted to kind of push it here. It's containable. We can look at Gaza. Gaza will be managed. I think, to be very brief on his answer, conflict management is over. So we learned that we have to have more of a solution, and it's going to be a tough solution. Like withdrawal of Gaza was a tough solution, but it has to be something more comprehensive and somewhere that the Palestinians eventually get which is U.S. foreign policy since Ronald Reagan, a state of their own, a viable state where they can live in dignity, not as a threat to Israel, that part no, but there will be exchange of land. As someone who was involved in that for years, I'm not going to go to the minutiae. It's going to be a very long negotiation, but it became so long that people said, okay, this is not going to be attainable. We got closest in 2000. In July of 2000, we got closest to having a two-state solution. I don't want to blame one person or the other, but there was historical evidence why it didn't work. And we had the Intifada right after that. Make sure that also the powers to be, the bigger powers, are involved. This, again, right now, the Russians are saying our relationship with Russia is sub-zero. That's not going to be helpful. Whether the Chinese are involved or not is important, because we, the United States of America, are not seen as an honest broker in this deal. So we have to have somebody else, the Europeans, somebody, the Arab countries. This is where the Gulf countries, which are involved right now, they have a lot of say, and they are politically active. They can be involved, and I'm glad that, again, as I said, our Secretary of State is looking at it. But the Israelis need to. Right now, they're very angry, rightfully so, and they're looking mainly to that one objective. Well, two objectives: get their hostages, dismantle Hamas. But the political side has to come through, which goes back to Mr. Lee's question. It's not about management anymore. There has to be a solution. There has to be a solution that Palestinians think. They don't think, okay, we have this, and then we got to get something more. No, this is what you have. The world will support you, and Israel will have eventually maybe even a working relationship, which they have had. But this is what you get. This is your land, and you are free in your land. What we call the two-state solution. That's our U.S. policy been, as I said, since Mr. Reagan. So I hope that was a proper, answer that he wanted.
I guess my question is do you think that is attainable, or are we going to get the Middle Eastern version of the Troubles?
Look, Troubles ended. I used to work at an Irish pub in New York. Hey, I know what the Troubles were because I was listening to them. I was not involved in any which way, except that I worked at an Irish pub in New York City. The days of the Troubles ended, and the Good Friday Agreement is holding perfectly right now. Ireland is one of the more peaceful countries in the world. Northern Ireland is still part of the United Kingdom. So right there, your answer is right there. You cannot give up on this. There has to be sacrifices. There has to be sacrifices on both sides. You cannot, and this is where the United Kingdom didn't force its way, or at least also in the 6 counties. I know enough about it, just a little bit, but not. But at the same time, there was a agreement. I mean, there was a time that Sinn Féin's leader Gerry Adams' voice was not allowed on BBC. Somebody else dubbed him. His voice was considered too provocative or too bad. Now he became a member of the parliament in there. So yes, there you go. I mean, you answered it. It's possible. That's the problem. We kept on saying in the Middle East it's not possible. Oh, nobody Jerusalem. What are you going to do about Jerusalem? Look, it's not Jerusalem. It's that little piece of land. And it is, I'm not saying it's not important. It's very important for especially Jews and Muslims. The Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif, whichever way you want to talk it. But for years, hundreds of years, it was under Ottoman rule, and nobody seemed to care. Pilgrims from everybody came to it. Sometimes history helps us. For much longer than now, which is 70 years, that little piece of land was under Ottoman rule, and go back in history. There was no conflict. It was a Muslim ruler that allowed everybody else to come in. And I'm not saying the Ottoman rule was perfect by no means, but it allowed some kind of a functionality. Imperfect. Everything. No state is perfect. We don't want perfection, but I think we have to be, as a former, peacemaker. I'm still a peacemaker. I always like peace, but I think we have to have, first and foremost, a vision and see where we are coming out from. We're coming out from the 7th of October. So that's the answer.
Yeah, I think, even you were saying there's historical precedent to, Jerusalem and there not being conflict. I think even today there's some examples of, because isn't the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the place where Jesus was supposed to have been crucified, like the keys to that church are held by a Muslim family.
Well, that was because the Christians couldn't agree who takes it. Yes, it's one family that has it. That's interesting, yeah. And also, even if you look at that, there's a lot of conflicts in that. There's actually a staircase ladder. It's there because there was an disagreement who should go there, and then they decided to leave it. So yes, it's not perfect. Some people laugh at it, but there's Protestants are not even there. They have a whole different place of it. And the Swedes built their church right across. The Lutherans. So at one point, people will kill over those things. You bring in the Christian story, and whether you crucify, whether you went this way or you went that way, tantamount to being, killed because you believed in Orthodoxy or Catholicism. And I'm not saying it's all over, but there was an agreement. We have to look at first we have to have some kind of a confidence building measure. Then we have to have a confidence and security building measure. That Israel feels secure and deterred. Israel was created, let us not forget that. For Israel, this is an existential threat. People say, well, Hamas only has rockets. No, it's not about rockets. People philosophically forget why the state of Israel is even there. State of Israel is there to give the Jews a state of their own post-Holocaust where they are not killed, burned, humiliated, put in ghettos. And the deterrence to that is what makes Israel the viability of this Israeli nationalism or Jewish nationalism. That's what Zionism is. People say a lot, it's nothing but Jewish nationalism. A secular movement in the beginning. Now it's different. To give them a state of their own where they're not persecuted and burned. When bodies are burned, as they were last month, that changes that whole perspective. And yes, they came to what was their homeland a long time ago. The nationalism, for them, it was natural to go there because when Herzl wrote the book, about the state for the Jews in German. It was the idea that returned back to the land that used to be Judea and Samaria or Israel. But the idea was less religious, more national, and more safety. That deterrence has to be brought back. This is an existential threat to Israel. So we have to see it from a perspective of a country that was created on basis of security of its people from persecutions of all kinds, pretty much anywhere in Europe. Lesser degree in France, for example, than Russia, but all over. And then Germans, of course, not the Germans, but the Third Reich did what everybody knows. But also a safe place of their own. So
that's right. I think we got one more question from Albert from the chat, and then that'll probably close us out. And he says, what internal pressures are there on the Israeli government for its ground campaign? It's been alleged that the Gaza border was understaffed as the IDF was deployed to keep West Bank settlers in check. And now some of those settlers have actually physically attacked IDF soldiers in the West Bank. And we've also had, I'll add to that, the folks who were from Gaza working in Israel have been essentially forced to return back to Gaza. So what kind of internal pressures are there for this ground? I know there was a protest a few days ago in Tel Aviv for the lack of speed.
The Israelis have coalesced around the government, which is very highly unpopular, because of what I said right before. This is an existential threat. This was not even imagined by Israelis. That, rockets, they always got it. That was the managed conflict, but not to come in their houses. And especially the people killed, most of these are peaceniks too, which is kind of the irony of all of it. That where they live, that's mostly the more, these people would have marched in Tel Aviv all these weeks against Mr. Netanyahu's judicial, I would say, reforms. So there's a lot of tension, but I think Israelis, by and large, not all of them, but by and large, have put pointing fingers where this happened for after the war. I think there was a agreement. This is why Mr. Gantz, who was also the largest opposition party against the Likud coalition led by Mr. Netanyahu, he is now in what is called the war cabinet. His going there, and he was used to be a chief of staff, is a showcase. Look, we don't agree politically. I don't agree with you in anything. We have been leading these demonstrations with millions of people all over Israel, even that night before the attacks of 7 October. However, what we are doing is right now we get together to get Hamas defeated. I think the jury is not out. Most Israelis are the question is whether who did it or the after action report should be given now or later. Some say that Mr. Netanyahu should not even be there right now. A lot say no, because it will hamper you can't have an election right now while you have a war going on. Mr. Netanyahu came in as a security prime minister. He's the longest serving prime minister in the state of Israel. My personal view is it would be almost impossible for him to win another election. And one reason that he had a coalition of people who, yes, put a lot of emphasis on settlements in the West Bank and expanding them. And as I said, the paper that if Mr. Lee sends you an email, you can send it. That whole thing is discussed there. That yes, there were the forces in Gaza around Gaza were thinned out for bringing them into the West Bank because the settlements were expanding. Also, there was a lot of demonstrations inside large cities of Israel, specifically Tel Aviv and also sometimes Jerusalem, around the Knesset and the Justice Ministry. So these questions will be answered. I do not think right now Israelis are ready to point fingers collectively, or maybe they will after a while. What would determine that is the speed of this. If this drags on for a long time, they may opt. Again, this is just I'm thinking aloud. Maybe I shouldn't think aloud, but it's if this campaign is stopped and achieves its goal sooner, and the hostages, it was important because a lot of people, have you seen that the whole hostage issue is important. Israel used to have one hostage and they gave thousands of prisoners, terrorists, people with Israeli blood in their hands, gave him for one person. Hezbollah did that. And Nasrallah mentioned that. They got, for one person, one Israeli IDF soldier that they abducted, they got more than 1,000 Hezbollah fighters. Some were terrorists, with most of them, all of the terrorists, but some of them with Israeli blood in their hands. Now we're talking about 240 plus. So getting them and dismantling Hamas is a tall order, but it's an order that determines also the future of how Israel looks like. Whether there be a change immediately, I don't think so. As I said, because they have given a pause for pointing fingers. I don't know if you heard or not. Yesterday there was a statement, or the day before yesterday. Yesterday we heard it by a member of cabinet, a junior member of cabinet of Mr. Netanyahu, who said that, and then he apologized afterwards that they have to use a weapon of mass destruction on Gaza, and I think that individual has been relieved of his duties. So there's a lot of very, very, very far right within this coalition who were pushing for expansions, pushing for making sure that Israel does not have a constitution, a written constitution. It has a series of laws that are passed by the Knesset. They call them basic laws. And that basically serves as the constitution, if you would. And they were trying to change it that the judiciary would be much less effective. And the judiciary in the Israeli system is actually what keeps the balance of not giving too much power to a ruling party. And that's what you saw all over Israel for the past almost year. So those are all, in my view, the pause, but can that pause last for too long? I don't know. It depends on what happens on the ground. And my belief is, from what I'm hearing, it's going to be next time we talk, there's going to be a lot of more action on the ground. And unfortunately, there will be also, most likely, as you mentioned, in an urban warfare with a densely populated area, casualties. Israel keeps on saying they look at the flyers that they have all, even now while they have encircled, that they have left the corridor open for civilians to go. They have designated areas further south in Gaza, but the whole Gaza area, not Gaza City, for them to go. But whether they don't want to go, whether Hamas doesn't let them go, whether they can't go physically or mentally, those are questions that I think right now in the short term will be answered. The question of Mr. Lee, I think that's on hold in a way. I don't think Israel will have an election right now. Some people want it, but I think this is too, you can't have an election in a war that's for the first time activated. Well, for not first time, but with a long time, Israel did not activate the entire reserve force. So this is very major undertaking. Some Israelis wish it was a different government, but you don't wish what you get. So you get what the Israeli system is very interesting. The election system, we can talk about that at length some other time. But it's coalition building, and this coalition was built with a very different perspective on how the two-state solution, they didn't even believe in it. Mr. Netanyahu's openly said he doesn't believe in it. And I think that you need somebody, my view again, that actually has that vision. So going back to the piece and we discussed the troubles, you need somebody who at least believes in the solution. If you don't believe in the solution, you can't really move on, because you always find something. As we heard that, there's nobody to talk to. Well, you need somebody to talk to if you want a solution, even if you are trying to help make that somebody to talk to. Yep.
Sure, and I think that's a good place to end on. I think that would be an interesting conversation to have later. So with that, thank you, Dr. Tarzi, for your time and insight once again. And thank you to all the folks who joined us today in the chat. That's all we have for this episode. So go ahead and carry out the plan of the day.
Thank you.